They sat me in the garage. Fold-out chair, plastic table, a fan that barely worked. At my parents' anniversary party. And when I asked my dad why, he didn't blink. It's just for extended family. Extended family. Everyone else was seated inside. Warm lighting, music, catered plates. Even my cousin Mark was there, the same cousin who once stole money from their safe. He was inside, laughing, toasting. I was in the garage, like clutter, like something they didn't want to show the guests. My name is Selena, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because sometimes the most beautiful kind of revenge is the one that's so silent it echoes. I didn't make a scene. Not right away. I sat there for 7 full minutes just looking around, at the extension cords on the wall, the old bike no one had ridden in years, the folding table with lukewarm appetizers and paper napkins. I looked down at my dress, the one I'd saved up for. Simple, elegant, black. The heels I'd borrowed from a friend just for the occasion. I had driven 3 hours, bought a thoughtful gift, wrote a letter inside it that I'd cried over twice, and now I was sharing a table with a lawn mower. I stood up, walked inside, and scanned the room. There was Mark, telling a story about his last vacation. There was Aunt Renee, sitting at the table I should have been at. There was my mother, laughing as if she didn't know where I was. I walked to the front, right past the cake, right up to the gift table, picked up my envelope. Quietly, intentionally, my father saw me, his eyebrows raised. "Selena, what are you doing?" I looked right at him, extending the respect you gave me. Then I turned, held up the envelope, and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Extend this." I walked out the front door. No screaming, no tears, no big scene, just silence. And then I heard her, my mother, running after me in heels, calling my name, asking, "Wait, what are you doing? Don't do this." But it was already done, because that night they didn't just seat me in the garage. They told the truth, the one they'd been hinting at for years. And I finally listened, but they had no idea what I'd been preparing all along. And what happened next would strip them of the one thing they valued more than reputation. Control. I was always the good one, the helper, the polite one, the one who didn't ask for much. If Mark got caught shoplifting, I was the one they sent to keep him company while he cried in the car. If my older sister threw a fit during dinner, I was the one who cleaned the table and quietly packed up leftovers while everyone pretended nothing happened. Being useful became my only currency, but being visible, that was never allowed. When I got into university on a partial scholarship, my dad barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great, but let's not brag. Your cousin Daniel got a full ride." When I landed my first job, an entry-level admin position with a nonprofit I loved, my mom asked, "Will that even cover rent?" They didn't mean to be cruel. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. They were just selective with their attention, selective with their praise, selective with who they brought forward when company came over. It was always the same people, the cousin who lied, the uncle who drank, the sister who dropped out and moved back home. They all got second chances. They all got seats at the table. Me, I got duties. Help set the table, Selena. Run to the store, Selena. Can you pick up Mark from the station? The worst part? I kept saying yes, because somewhere inside, I believed if I kept being helpful, they'd eventually see me, eventually choose me. But what happened at that anniversary party? That was my breaking point. Not because of the garage, but because when I looked through the window from the outside, I saw my family laughing like I wasn't missing, like they hadn't noticed I was gone. That's when I realized I wasn't just excluded. I was optional, replaceable, easily boxed away when I didn't fit the image they wanted to display. And in that moment, standing on the front lawn in borrowed heels, envelope clutched in one hand and 27 years of swallowed pride in the other, I made a decision. Not just to walk away, but to show them what happens when the invisible one finally removes her support. Because they had no idea just how much of their life I held together. And when I let go, they would feel it. I didn't call the next day, didn't text, didn't apologize. I just vanished. Not from the world, just from theirs. No more answering my mother's calls on the first ring. No more sending reminders for doctor appointments. No more updating the extended family spreadsheet I had managed for the past 6 years. Birthdays, allergies, emergency contacts, all of it. It was subtle at first. Just a small emptiness. But small cracks turn into deep ones, fast. 3 days after the party, my sister texted, "Hey, Mom's asking if you mailed the thank you cards for the florist and DJ? She thought you'd already handled it." I didn't reply, because I had always handled it. Quietly, automatically, invisibly. But now, they were on their own. By the end of the week, I heard from Aunt Renee, the same one who had taken my seat at the party without blinking. "Hi, sweetheart. Your mom said you were upset? She didn't mean to offend you. It was just a mix-up with the seating." A mix-up. Funny how the only mix-ups always happen to me. The gift envelope was never mentioned. They didn't ask what was inside. A generous check and a handwritten letter with every memory I had of their marriage. Every time I saw them love each other in ways they didn't see themselves. They didn't ask because they assumed they were still entitled to it. My father left a voicemail on day 9. "Selena, I know you're upset, but this little tantrum, it's making things harder for everyone. Just call your mother and sort it out." Tantrum, that was the word. Because in his world, the only reason a woman ever stands up for herself is emotion. Not boundaries. Not hurt. Not a lifetime of being overlooked. Just drama. That message? I saved it, not to keep the pain, but to remind myself why I left. Then came the mistake. My mother tried to host a small brunch with her charity friends. A post-party thank you. She assumed I'd scheduled the catering. She assumed I'd sent the invites. Confirmed the guest list. Coordinated with the florist. She even texted me, "Make sure they bring lilies. You know I hate roses." I left it on read. The day of the brunch? Nothing arrived. The guests stood in a half-decorated backyard. No food. No drinks. No music. Just embarrassment. And still, she didn't say the words I was waiting for. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We need you." Not, "We were wrong." Just this, "I thought you'd take the high road, Selena." But here's what she didn't understand. I was on the high road. I just stopped carrying their load with me. I didn't want revenge. Not the movie kind. Not the screaming, flipping tables, burn it all down kind. I wanted truth. I wanted them to see the machine they'd built and how much of it only ran because I turned the gears in the background. So I started with the family fund. A long time ago, my parents opened a joint savings account for family emergencies. Nothing formal, just something to cover last-minute plane tickets, urgent expenses, birthdays no one budgeted for. They let everyone use it, as long as it went through me. I'd been tracking it for years. I had login access, monthly reports, even the tax statements they forgot I prepared every April. They never noticed it was my name on the backup authorization form. They just assumed I'd always manage it, like the polite daughter I was trained to be. That same week, I requested my removal. Quietly, formally, legally. I also sent a courtesy notice to the bank, flagging inconsistencies I'd long kept quiet about. Duplicate reimbursements, unexplained withdrawals, even a cash transfer to my cousin Mark. Yes, the same one who stole from them years ago. Nothing criminal, just sloppy. They'd been too comfortable for too long. Next, I contacted my cousin Dahlia, the only one who ever sat with me in the kitchen while the real guests laughed in the next room. She's a graphic designer now. Brilliant. Underpaid. I offered her a project, one I'd been planning for months but never had the nerve to start. A community blog. Small. Focused on quiet family estrangement. Stories from people like me. People who weren't kicked out violently, just gently set aside until they disappeared. We called it The Spare Chair. Dahlia designed the logo. I wrote the first piece. We didn't name names, but anyone who knew my parents would know exactly who that first story was about. And finally, I pulled the thread they never thought I'd touch. The anniversary photos. A distant cousin had taken them. I had offered to coordinate the photographer. In return, he'd given me full access to the folder. I downloaded everything. Every picture of everyone. except me, because I wasn't in them, not even one. But the captions they wrote online said, "So grateful to have our whole family together. A perfect day." So I emailed the photographer, asked him to take the gallery down. He agreed and added a line I'll never forget. They said it was a family portrait, but it looked like something was missing. Exactly, something was. And they were finally starting to feel it. They didn't notice the collapse all at once. It came in fragments. A brunch canceled, a fund frozen, a gallery gone. But the moment that really hit? The night of the follow-up celebration dinner, the one my mother planned to repair our image with her friends. The florist didn't show. The menu was wrong. One of the guests canceled, citing confusion around the event's coordination. Why? Because for years that had all gone through me. I wasn't invited this time, obviously, but I still got photos from Dahlia, who had a friend working the event. My mother looked tired. My father? Distracted, like a man realizing the stage manager quit in the middle of the performance. 2 days later, I received a text from my mother. "I wish you'd reconsider all this. Family doesn't treat each other this way, especially over something so small. Small, being seated in the garage like an afterthought, having your gift taken off the table, hearing your own father say extended family while your thief of a cousin sat front row. That wasn't small. That was pattern. A pattern I had finally broken." Then the photos vanished from their Facebook albums. The ones labeled "Perfect Night" and "Grateful for a whole family." Gone. Not replaced. Just quietly deleted. Like removing the evidence would erase the truth. They didn't know I'd already backed them up. Because I wasn't trying to destroy their story. I was documenting mine. That same week, I published my third post on the spare chair. It was titled, "The Day I Stopped Apologizing for Taking Up Space." No names, no spite, just truth. The post went semi-viral in family forums and quiet corners of the internet. It was shared by therapists, grief coaches, adult children who had sat through one too many dinners in silence. And at the very bottom, I left this. Sometimes it's not the shouting that breaks you. It's the smile across the table while they ignore your empty plate. My inbox flooded, not with hate, with recognition. You wrote what I've never been able to say out loud. I thought I was the only one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But one email stood out. It was from a woman in her 50s. They sat me next to the coat rack at my own sister's wedding. I was 7 months pregnant and nobody said a word. I wish I'd walked out like you did. I cried reading it, not because I was sad, because I wasn't alone. And when you've spent a lifetime being told to wait your turn, fade into the background, and be the bigger person, hearing "me too" is more powerful than any apology. Back in my parents' world, they were still trying to keep things together. But now, even their friends were asking quiet questions. Where's Selena these days? Did I hear she runs something online now? Was she not at the party? And for the first time, they had no answer, because the person they always dismissed had become the one they couldn't explain away. They always thought of me as the stable one. Never dramatic, never demanding, never difficult, which made me the perfect person to erase quietly until they needed something handled, fixed, or forgotten. But when the world started noticing I was gone, their story stopped making sense. It started with a local newsletter feature about generational leadership in community families. They were interviewed about the family fund, the same one I'd quietly stepped away from. The article mentioned Selena handled our logistics for years, in past tense. But one of the reporters had followed the spare chair. She emailed me for a quote. I declined. Still, she connected the dots. The story went live with this sentence. Notably absent from recent events is Selena, long considered the logistical core of the family's philanthropic work. Just one sentence, but it opened a floodgate. Within days, the foundation received 2 calls from longtime donors. Not angry, just curious. We were under the impression Selena still coordinated programs. Has that changed? Why is her name not on any of the upcoming campaigns? They didn't have an answer, because for years they never needed one. I was just the daughter in the background. Now, the background was missing, and people noticed. Meanwhile, the spare chair kept growing. Submissions tripled. Dahlia and I had to build a second site folder just to organize the stories pouring in. There was one from a teacher whose mother told her not to bring her same-sex partner to Thanksgiving. Another from a man who was told he could sit with the caterers at his brother's wedding. Each story different, but the message was the same. You're welcome here, as long as you don't need a real seat. My parents still didn't reach out with anything real. My mother forwarded an invite to a smaller, more intimate dinner. No subject line, no apology, just, we'll keep a spot open. That was it. I didn't reply, because I didn't want a spot. I wanted respect. And now, I had it, from people who never once made me beg for it. Then came the audit. Remember that family fund? Turns out the casual management had caught attention after my formal exit. The bank flagged repeated cash withdrawals from multiple relatives, none of which were properly tracked. No one was accused of theft, but questions were asked. And for a family obsessed with control and image, being questioned was the worst kind of scandal. My cousin Mark messaged me out of nowhere. You're really trying to ruin everyone, huh? I didn't respond, because I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I had just stopped protecting the illusion. I received a final email from my father. 3 words. We're disappointed, Selena. Not surprised. Not curious. Not sorry. Just disappointed. I almost laughed, because in the end, disappointment was mutual. Except I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped pretending there ever was one. I always thought rising would feel like revenge, like applause, like validation, like finally being proven right in front of everyone who doubted me. But it didn't. It felt like quiet mornings, like drinking coffee in a space that didn't ask me to shrink, like laughing with people who didn't keep score, like watching my own reflection grow softer and stronger at the same time. That was the real rise. The spare chair hit 100,000 monthly readers. We didn't market it, didn't chase virality, just let the story speak. We added a podcast, invited real people to share their moments. Not trauma porn, just truth. 1 episode. I was uninvited to my own baby shower. Another, he called me dramatic. I called a moving truck. Every voice was a brick in the house I never had growing up. A house where no one had to earn their seat. Where family wasn't a weapon. Where silence didn't mean safety, it meant choice. I moved into a small 2-bedroom place on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy. No crown molding. No long dining table built to impress guests. Just bookshelves I filled myself. Walls I painted the exact shade of green the first wanted. And a desk where I wrote in the early mornings, not for approval, but for myself. Sometimes I lit a candle before I wrote. I always chose the same scent, fig and cedar. Warm, earthy, whole. I made new friends, not ones who knew my parents, not ones who asked, but do you think they meant to hurt you? Just people who took me as I was. People who said, you don't owe anyone your softness just because they raised you. My sister reached out eventually. An email. I don't agree with how you handled it, but I miss you. That was it. No ownership. No accountability. Just a thread. Hoping I'd be the one to weave the whole thing back together. I didn't respond, because I wasn't interested in returning to the table. I was building better ones, and the people who sat at mine brought their own napkins. They didn't expect me to serve them and thank them for being there. One day I was interviewed for a podcast I admired. They asked, what would you say to the version of yourself who stayed in the garage that night? I took a long breath before I answered. I'd say, I know you're scared. I know you think leaving makes you selfish. But one day, you'll sit at your own table, and you'll realize that leaving wasn't betrayal. It was the beginning of becoming someone no one gets to ignore again. I still remember the exact sound the chair made when I stood up from it in the garage. That awkward metal scrape, one I was supposed to ignore. One that was meant to blend into the background of just be grateful you're invited. It was the moment I chose myself, before I even knew what choosing myself looked like. That sound, it became the start of everything. Sometimes I drive past my parents' neighborhood, not to stare at the house, not to fantasize about some dramatic reunion, just to remind myself that I don't live there anymore. Not physically, not emotionally, not in the quiet corners of my mind that used to hope for something soft to bloom where only sharp edges had ever been. I don't hate them, truly, but I don't miss them either. I miss the idea of them, the version of family I tried to believe in, the version of me that thought if I just stayed helpful long enough, I'd finally be chosen without needing to prove myself. That girl? She deserved better. And now, she has it. My mother never apologized. My father never called. But that's okay, because closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes it comes from no longer needing one. Sometimes it's found in the sound of your own voice when it's finally loud enough to fill the room they kept trying to shrink you out of. Sometimes it's found in silence you chose. Last month, someone from the original anniversary party messaged me. Not family, just one of the guests. I didn't know what happened that night, but I remember you. You were the only one who looked real in the whole room. I stared at the message for a long time, because I used to think being quiet meant being small. Now, I know better. Being quiet can mean power. Being calm can mean certainty. And walking away doesn't make you heartless. It makes you free. Sometimes I think about the letter I wrote that night, the one I had sealed inside the envelope on the gift table. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was a letter of memories, of thank yous, of moments I thought mattered. I never gave it to them, but I kept it, not to remind myself of what they lost, to remind myself of what I gave for so long without ever being asked how much it cost me. And now, I give to people who give back. I love without dimming. I stand without permission. They once asked me to sit in the garage so the photos would look better. Now, I don't need to be in the photo because I built the whole frame and the story I'm living now. It may not be picture perfect, but every single part of it includes me.
The violins were still playing when my daughter leaned in and said, "Mom, we need to go. Now." I remember the way her fingers gripped my wrist, not dramatic, not panicked, but firm, final. Her eyes were steady, trained on something behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't ask questions. I just blinked at her, confused by the quiet urgency in her voice. It was my parents' 40th anniversary party. There were candles floating in glass bowls, white roses spilling over gold-rimmed vases, crystal chandeliers catching every bit of light above the country club ballroom. It was the kind of evening they had always loved, elegant, rehearsed, admired. The kind of event where image wasn't just everything, it was the only thing. But my daughter, Lily Harper, 16 and sharp-eyed, wasn't looking at the roses or the chandeliers. She was watching people. And in that moment, she saw something I hadn't. If you've lived long enough, you learn that betrayal doesn't always come in slammed doors or shouted words. Sometimes it walks in wearing a tuxedo and offers you champagne. My name is Claire Harper. I'm 34, divorced, 2 kids, freelance designer. Some days I sell handmade cards online to keep the lights on. Other days I teach beginner watercolor to retirees at the community center. Not the kind of life my parents ever imagined for their only daughter. My parents are Charles and Evelyn Whitmore Chuck and Evie to their friends. To me, they've always been something between royalty and employers. My father built a real estate empire. My mother curated the image that went with it. Nothing in our household growing up was accidental, not my piano lessons, not my posture, not the man I married. I spent most of my 20s believing I had finally done it right when I married Andrew Sinclair, the son of one of Dad's business partners. Drew was polished, ambitious, and utterly fluent in my parents' language of status. They adored him, even when he started pulling away, even when he began correcting my tone in front of guests, even when he came home late and smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. I found out about the affair with his assistant Kayla, 25, and sharp as a knife a year ago. The divorce was cold and expensive. He moved into a condo downtown. I moved with Lily and my 8-year-old son Jake into a modest rental with cracked linoleum and a view of the neighbor's trampoline. I thought that would be the hard part starting over. I didn't realize the harder part would be deciding who was still my family. To my surprise, my parents called more. They invited us to Sunday dinner. They dropped off gifts for Jake's birthday. They offered to help. It felt like they were choosing me finally. Not Drew, not Image, me. But Lily wasn't convinced. "They're trying to fix you," she said one night while doing homework at the kitchen table. "Like you're something they can patch up and put back into their narrative." I laughed, trying not to let her words land. "They're showing love the way they know how." She looked at me and said nothing. That was worse than any argument. Jake, on the other hand, lit up when they visited. My father took him to baseball games, slipped him $100 bills for candy, and books told him stories about when you take over the family business someday. My mother beamed at him with the kind of pride I used to try and earn. When the gold-embossed invitation to the anniversary party arrived, I felt hope again. A grand affair at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Maybe this was it, rebuilding, reclaiming, being seen. I spent weeks helping my mother with the guest list. I altered a dress from before the divorce because I couldn't afford a new one. I even made a photo album of their 40 years together curated with care. Lily watched me glue captions onto pages with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Because family shows up," I said more to myself than to her. What I didn't know then, what she was already starting to suspect, was that showing up doesn't mean you're welcome. And sometimes the people who raised you are the same ones planning to quietly remove you from the story. The day of the party bloomed like a postcard. Early June sun stretched across the lawn of the Oak Ridge Country Club, casting everything in that forgiving golden light my mother always said was perfect for photos. I helped Lily with her hair. She resisted the emerald green dress my mother had sent. "It's not me," she muttered, but eventually gave in with a sigh. "Just for a few hours," I promised. "It'll make Grandma happy." She didn't answer, just stared at herself in the mirror like she already knew what I didn't. We arrived a little past 6. The lobby was transformed, white roses everywhere, string quartet in the corner, champagne flutes already in motion. I took a breath and adjusted my dress. My parents stood near the entrance like visiting royalty. My father, Charles Whitmore, in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My mother, Evelyn, radiant in silver beading. Her smile stretched wide as she kissed the air near my cheeks. "Claire, darling, you look comfortable. And Lily, what a color on you. I knew emerald would bring out your eyes." Her compliments always felt like subtle edits. Jake had barely stepped in before my father swept him up with exaggerated joy. "There's my boy, special seat for you right next to Grandpa tonight, head table." No mention of Lily. Barely a glance at me. But I swallowed it. This was their night. The ballroom filled quickly. Faces I half recognized from golf tournaments and charity auctions. Old business partners, second wives, third cousins. I smiled through rehearsed conversations, shaking hands and accepting sympathy for the divorce as if I were accepting awards. "It's been hard, but we're adjusting. The kids are resilient. No, I'm not dating." Then I saw them. Near the door. Andrew Drew Sinclair, my ex-husband, looking freshly pressed in a navy suit. Kayla, the reason for the divorce, stood beside him like she owned the room. My stomach dropped. I turned to my sister-in-law Rachel and whispered, "Did you know they were coming?" She looked away. "Your mother sent them a personal invitation." "I assumed you knew." Of course she had. My parents greeted Drew and Kayla like long-lost heirs, hugging, laughing, complimenting her dress. When my eyes finally met my mother's across the room, she gave a delicate shrug. "Bygones, darling. Drew's practically family." I retreated to the bar and let the ice in my glass keep me upright. Across the room, Lily stood still, her phone in her hand, watching everyone with narrowed eyes. She was texting, but not to friends. She was gathering something. And I, still caught in a fog of old instincts, chose not to ask. The night blurred into a stream of polite conversation and rehearsed smiles. Jake was glowing. He'd been moved to the seat between Grandpa and Drew, laughing like it was the best night of his life. Lily, though, hadn't touched her plate. I spotted her across the ballroom in quiet conversation with my Aunt Linda Evelyn's sister. They stopped talking when I approached. Smiles too quick. Eyes that didn't match their mouths. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just catching up," Linda said lightly. Lily's quite the observer, she added too brightly. We were discussing family history. Before I could press further, a chime rang out. My father raised his glass. The room hushed. 40 years ago, Chuck Whitmore began. I made the best business decision of my life. Polite laughter. Marriage, my friends, is about vision, legacy. Sometimes we must prioritize the future over temporary discomforts. His gaze skimmed across the room, rested briefly on Drew, then Jake, then me. Tonight, we're not just celebrating the past, we're securing the future. Glasses clinked. Applause followed. A few confused looks. I caught Lily's eye across the room. She wasn't confused. She was confirming something. I didn't know it yet, but my father hadn't thrown this party to honor the past. He'd orchestrated it to announce a future I had no place in. Dinner arrived like clockwork, perfectly plated, perfectly timed. I tried to enjoy it. I really did. The steak was tender, the wine was fine, but my mouth had gone dry. My father and Drew were leaning in close over Jake, whispering and laughing, their heads bent together like old business partners. Jake seemed to beam under the attention, his little shoulders squared like he belonged there. Lily, on the other hand, kept glancing at her phone, tapping beneath the table. She hadn't eaten a bite. Her jaw was set. I leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded. Too fast. From where I sat, I could see my mother showing Kayla yes. Kayla, the family jewelry that once had my name written on small paper tags in my mother's vanity. Emerald earrings, the pearl bracelet my grandmother wore at her own wedding. Evelyn touched Kayla's wrist and smiled the smile she used when she was about to replace something without asking. My seat, it turned out, wasn't next to Jake. It was closer to the corner, near distant cousins and business wives. When I approached the table earlier, there was no name card for me. "We didn't think you'd mind," Evelyn had said, glancing at the guest list as if it had slipped her mind. They had always been masters of subtle omission. After the entree, I stepped into the hallway to collect myself. As I turned the corner, I nearly collided with Aunt Linda again. She flinched. "Brooke, sorry, Claire. I've been meaning to talk to you alone." I blinked. No one had called me Brooke in years. That was the name I'd left behind with my marriage. "Something wrong?" Linda hesitated, lowering her voice. "I overheard your father and Drew earlier. They were talking about transferring assets. Something about restructuring for liability purposes. Your name came up, along with words like unreliable, unfit." The hallway swayed a little. I held onto the railing. "Richard Charles? He's always liked control," she added quickly. "But this feels different." Before I could ask more, my mother appeared cool and polished as ever. "Linda, the photographer, is waiting for the sister's photo." Linda offered a quick apology and vanished, leaving me with nothing but her warning. When I returned, Lily was gone. Jake now sat on Drew's lap, their faces close together over a phone screen, laughing at something I wasn't invited to see. Evelyn stood behind them, beaming at them, not me. "Where's Lily?" I asked. My mother sighed. "She's been moody lately. Said something about getting some air. Maybe check the terrace." I found her outside, back turned to the party phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, that's exactly what the document said. I need to know if that's even legal." She saw me and ended the call. "Mom, how's the party? Who were you talking to? Just..." "A friend." She tucked her phone away. Then, "Have you noticed how much time Grandpa is spending with Drew?" "They're probably talking business," I said, but the words came out thin. She studied my face. "Mom, when's the last time you looked in Grandpa's office?" I blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Last time we visited, I needed a quiet place to study. Grandma told me to use it while Grandpa was golfing." She looked right at me. "There were documents. About you. About Drew. Custody. Property. Red flags marking entire pages." A breeze picked up her hair. "You're more upset that I saw them than what they said." Before I could respond, the doors opened and servers began bringing out the cake. "Just watch them tonight," Lily whispered. "How they look at Drew. How they place Jake between them. How you don't appear in the slideshow." It hadn't started yet, but when the first image flashed across the screen, 40 years of love and legacy in gold script, I already knew. The photos played Chuck and Evelyn on their honeymoon, business launches, children smiling, Brian and his wife, Drew holding Jake at last year's holiday brunch. I appeared once, maybe twice. Lily only in a distant group shot. My seat at their table had been removed, and now slowly they were erasing me from the story altogether. Fan 4. The plan to take it all. The moment we got in the car, Lily locked the doors. She didn't speak right away, just stared out the windshield while Jake in the back seat played with a light-up yo-yo someone had handed him at the party. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then, softly, pull over, somewhere quiet. I did. We parked in an empty strip mall lot just outside a closed bakery. Streetlights hummed above us. Lily unlocked her phone and turned on the interior light. I didn't just call a friend earlier, she said. I called Aunt Sam. My throat tightened. Samantha. That can't be right. She hasn't spoken to this family in 15 years. Lily nodded. Because Grandpa did to her? Exactly what he's trying to do to you. She handed me the phone. Text messages. Dozens. Weeks long. Sam, watch how he treats your brother compared to your mom. Has he started saying things like legacy or stability? That's code. Don't let them announce anything in public. It's a trap. I scrolled in disbelief. Each thread was a warning. All the pieces Lily had seen and I had missed. Mom. I snuck into Grandpa's study during the party. I took pictures. She opened her gallery. I saw scanned copies of legal drafts, property transfer papers with Drew listed as custodial parent of Jake custody modification forms, with notes in my father's handwriting, Claire unstable, Art income unreliable, Ethan better off in structure, trust fund realignments naming Drew as trustee in event of unforeseen maternal absence. My hands trembled. I was holding proof, cold, calculated, and already in motion. Lily's voice wavered, but her eyes never left mine. Grandpa doesn't want a daughter. He wants an heir. And Jake's the safest bet since I won't play by his rules. I felt a sickness rising in my stomach. How do you even know what these documents mean? She hesitated. Aunt Sam's lawyer friend explained them to me. I sent over photos. She said, what they're doing might not just be immoral, it could be illegal. That was when I realized how deep I'd been buried. How long I had wanted to believe my family wasn't capable of this. I couldn't let you stay tonight, Lily said, voice low. I think they were going to announce something, maybe that Drew was getting the house. Or that Jake would live with him, something public, something binding. So you couldn't fight back without looking crazy. The words hit like ice in my lungs. Because I knew in my bones it was true. My parents hadn't just invited my ex to their anniversary. They had built the evening around him. I'm so sorry you had to carry this alone, I whispered. I wanted to believe they finally accepted me. Lily shook her head. They never did, Mom. They just accepted how well you hid your disappointment. She reached across and took my hand. But you don't have to pretend anymore. We sat in the dark, mother and daughter, with one child sleeping and one secret broken open between us. I barely slept that night. After putting Jake to bed, I sat at the kitchen table while Lily sorted her photos and messages into a clean folder on her laptop. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who'd carried this weight far too long. By 6 a.m., I called my older brother Mark in Seattle. He didn't sound surprised. I never liked what Dad and Drew were planning, he admitted after a pause. I just didn't think they'd go this far. You knew, I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. About the property, the trust Jake. Another pause, some of it. They said it was about tax strategy, keeping things clean. I didn't know it meant cutting you out. He promised to forward every email, every message where Dad and Drew discussed family arrangements. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. By mid-morning, I had an appointment with Jennifer Morales, the lawyer Samantha had used all those years ago. Her office was quiet, nothing showy. Just rows of well-worn books and 2 chairs that didn't try to impress me. She read silently while Lily explained. Then she looked up and said, "They're counting on you being too ashamed, too overwhelmed, or too isolated to fight." "I'm not isolated anymore," I said. "I have my daughter. I have evidence. and I'm done being quiet. Jennifer outlined the first step file an emergency petition to freeze any property transfers involving the family trust and the deed to the house. Second, notify the court of potential custody manipulation. Third, document every interaction with Drew and my parents. I thought of Jake, how they held him between them like a future to be claimed. They've been planting things in his head, I said, about boarding school, about a real family legacy. Jennifer nodded. That's called parental conditioning. Judges take it seriously, especially when one child is being groomed and the other she looked at Lily as being erased. Lily met her gaze without flinching. By the end of the meeting, the papers were filed. That night, I did something I never imagined I called my parents. My mother answered. Claire, she said too evenly. I was hoping you'd call to apologize. I'm calling, I said, but not to apologize. There was a pause. Then my father's voice joined hers on speaker. This family has always handled things privately. You airing grievances after a party isn't the way. What you did at that party wasn't family, I said. It was ambush dressed as champagne. I told them what I knew, the documents, the audio, Samantha's testimony, Mark's messages. My voice never wavered. My father finally said, You're being emotional, Claire. This is exactly why we worried, and this, I said, is exactly why you won't control my life anymore. Then Lily, who had been listening beside me, leaned in. You underestimated the wrong generation, Grandpa. I ended the call. No threats, no pleading, just silence. And for once, I didn't feel it. 3 days after the call, I received a letter from my father's attorney, a warning dressed as formality. It stated that any unauthorized interference with Wallace family assets could be interpreted as a breach of agreement. The irony was staggering. I'd never signed a thing. Jennifer wasn't surprised. They're testing your fear, she said, reviewing the letter. That's how power works when it starts to lose control. It postures. The legal strategy continued. We filed a cease transfer order on the Victorian house. Jennifer submitted a request for family trust documents to be independently reviewed, and Lily compiled a meticulous record of everything: texts, recordings, time-stamped photos, emails from Mark. But the hardest part wasn't in courtrooms or offices. It was Jake. He'd grown quieter, more withdrawn since the party. He still cuddled up to me at night, still asked for one more story. But I could see it, that flicker of confusion in his eyes. And it broke something in me I didn't know was still whole. One afternoon, I overheard him tell Lily, Grandpa says if I move in with Dad, I'll get a dog. And a bedroom with a telescope. He said it softly, like it was a secret he shouldn't carry. We started family therapy soon after. Not for conflict resolution, but for protection. For truth. The therapist, Dr. Alan Price, was a calm man with careful eyes. Jake fidgeted through the first session, twisting the sleeve of his shirt. Dr. Price asked, Do you feel like the grown-ups are asking you to choose sides? Jake nodded slowly. They say Mom is busy, that she doesn't have time or money for the big things. I kept my face still. I didn't cry. That wasn't what Jake needed from me. What are the big things? Dr. Price asked gently. Boarding school, trips, a real family name. The word real lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Later that evening, Lily came into my room holding her laptop. Mom, she said I found something. It was a financial trail. Payments made from my father's business account into Drew's private legal fund timed exactly around the party. 1 week before, 1 day after. Each marked for custodial planning. Lily's hands shook as she scrolled. They were paying to build a case, she said, while we were smiling for photos. The thought struck me. Had they ever intended for me to show up to that party as anything but a placeholder? A box to tick before cutting me out completely was the dress my mother sent. A costume for the stage. When we told Jennifer, she nodded grimly. This confirms financial collusion to interfere with custody, she said. We're adding it to the motion. As the case built momentum, the reaction came swift and cold. My father stopped returning calls. My mother sent a short email. We are heartbroken you've chosen to drag this into the public. I didn't respond. Not to that. Not when Drew showed up 2 weeks later with a proposal. We met in a coffee shop. I kept my phone visible on the table. "This isn't sustainable," he said, eyes flicking to the recorder. "The lawyers. The damage. Jake's in the middle of something ugly." "Then stop putting him there," I said. He tried to soften. Said he'd consider stepping back from the property deal if I agreed to a shared custody revision. Informal, flexible, beneficial, beneficial to whom I asked. "To Ethan," he said. Then he corrected himself to Jake. That slip told me everything. He wasn't trying to win Jake's heart. He was trying to win legacy. "You don't get to write the ending, Drew," I said, standing up. "You're just in it." I left before he could answer. Outside, the air felt different, crisper, like something in me had finally settled. Still, the question lingered: if Drew was beginning to unravel, what would my parents do next? They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by the daughter they'd spent decades training to obey. 2 months after the anniversary party, Jennifer called. "It's time," she said. "They've stalled every motion they could, but with Lily's records, Brian's emails, and Drew's slip-ups, we have enough." The hearing wasn't public, not yet, but it was formal. And in that courtroom, everything my parents had protected with charm and silence began to show cracks. We presented the draft emails between my father and Drew about custodial restructuring, the financial transfers from Wallace Development labeled Family Strategy, voice recordings from the party including my father saying it's time Brooke stepped aside for the good of the Wallace name. Most damning of all was Lily's testimony. 16, calm, unflinching. She told the judge about the night on the terrace, the documents, the red flags. The moment she knew her family wasn't protecting her mother, they were erasing her. When asked why she got involved, she said, "Because I was the only one paying attention. And because she's my mom." Drew's team attempted to discredit her as emotionally influenced. Jennifer responded with a copy of his payment logs. If a teenager can uncover a legal conspiracy, she said maybe we should be listening to her instead of silencing her. Outside the courtroom, my mother didn't look at me. My father did. Just once. That old look disappointment mingled with disbelief, like he couldn't fathom how I'd learned to stand. "You could have come to us quietly," he muttered. "And you could have told the truth," I replied. For once, he had no answer. The judge's decision didn't strip them of their wealth or erase decades of control, but it did freeze the trust restructuring, protect Jake's current custody arrangement, and crucially barred Drew from assuming sole ownership of the Victorian house. The court appointed a neutral third-party trustee to oversee any future decisions involving family assets. It wasn't a victory parade, but it was enough. After the hearing, Brian called. I saw the filing. "You really did it." "I didn't do it alone," I said. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Lily, she's Dad's blind spot. He never saw her coming. For weeks after the Wallace house went quiet. No more emails, no more proposals disguised as family dinners. But silence didn't mean surrender. I stayed cautious. Documents stayed filed. Visitation stayed structured. And every conversation with Jake ended the same way: you are loved. Not for what you give, just for who you are. One morning, Lily knocked on my door, holding an envelope. "You might want to read this," she said. It was a letter from my mother, handwritten, careful cursive. Brooke families survive by tradition, but not all traditions deserve survival. I cannot undo what's been done, but I see now that silence is not the same as peace. Give Jake our love. Tell Lily. She was right. There was no apology, but there was an admission. That was more than I ever expected. That night, Lily and I sat on the porch. The summer air smelled like pine and rain. Jake slept upstairs hugging a toy fox Lily had bought him last Christmas. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but we don't have to wait for them to." She was quiet for a while, then smiled. "You know, if this were a movie, this would be the part where we say something profound." "Yeah, but I think the truth's better." "Which part?" "That you didn't need saving Mom. You just needed someone to look you in the eye and say, 'I see it too.'" And that's what Lily gave me, a mirror that didn't distort. A daughter who stood where I'd once been at the edge of a lie and stepped back before it swallowed her. 6 months later, the Wallace family gathered again. Not at a country club, not for a celebration, but for a legal mediation, final arrangements on the trust, custody stipulations, and a permanent record of what had been attempted and what had failed. This time I came prepared. Jennifer beside me, Lily just behind. Jake stayed home drawing rockets and dinosaurs and pretending the world was still simple. My father opened with civility, polished, collected. We're here to avoid further fragmentation. My mother sat stiff, a silk scarf knotted tightly at her throat. She didn't speak. Their lawyer outlined the final revisions. My ownership of the Victorian house was affirmed irrevocably. The children's inheritance divided equally locked until age 25. No future trust or asset decisions would involve Drew without my written consent. Then came the clause about family access. Supervised, limited, conditional on documented respect for my parental decisions. My father read that line twice. So we're no longer grandparents. We're vetted visitors. Your family, Jennifer replied, just not immune to consequence. The documents were signed, no ceremony, no photographs, just the shuffle of papers, the scratch of pens, and the end of a lineage of control. On our way out, my mother finally spoke. You always were more like Samantha than I cared to admit. That used to be an insult, I replied. Now I take it as a compliment. She looked down, smoothed her gloves. Didn't deny it. Lily and I walked to the car in silence. In the parking lot, she paused. Do you feel anything tired? I said. But lighter. I didn't look back at the building. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed their version of closure. We drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and faraway rain. When we walked in, Jake ran up holding a drawing. This one's for you, Mom, he said. It's us. In a rocket. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, he whispered. That night, after both kids were asleep, I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on an empty document. I didn't write about pain, or betrayal, or legal battles. I wrote a grocery list. I looked up a family therapist for long-term support. I bookmarked a summer camp Lily might enjoy. I started life again not because I won, but because I finally stopped asking for permission. In the end, there was no apology big enough to fix what they'd broken. But there was something better. A daughter who saw through the lie, a son who still called me first, and a truth no longer buried under politeness and property. The last email I got from my father was short. You left us no choice. I never replied, because I finally understood I didn't need to explain why I walked away.